Good morning, everyone. Hello, and welcome to our 60-minute briefing with China's ambassador to the European Union, Ambassador Zhang Ming. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us for the 60-minute conversation with EPC. We have a lot to discuss, Ambassador, the state of EU-China relations, but also the results, the outcomes of the two sessions that were just held in Beijing last week. But before we start that conversation, some EPC rules of engagement. Ambassador, you and I will have a conversation for about 30 minutes, and then we will take questions and answers from the many participants who are joining us for this briefing. All of you, please put your questions in the Q&A box on the Zoom frame, and I will try and get them to the ambassador during the second part of our conversation. Let me now also come back to you now, Ambassador, and start this conversation. Now, I know if there was no pandemic, you would actually have been in Beijing, because what I didn't know, and I found out, is that you're a member of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. And my question for you would be, how do you combine that with your day job, if you like, of being China's ambassador to the EU? But Ambassador, before we start that conversation, I want to discuss a few of the most recent developments in EU-China relations. Now, the first one has to do with the planned sanctions, the so-called Magnitsky sanctions over the Uyghur question, which I think will be decided quite soon. And my second point to you would be also the EU's response to the National People's Congress decisions on Hong Kong, on the electoral reform decisions that have been taken. Those are the two pressing questions on our agenda. So if you don't mind, let's kick off with that. Let me get your reactions first, Ambassador, to the Xinjiang question.
Thank you, Shada. So nice to have the chance to meet you again. Well, you asked about two important issues. Please allow me to spend a few minutes on that. Well, on Xinjiang, I have noted the media reports, and I'm deeply concerned about possible sanctions on China. We are against interference in others' internal affairs, against the sanctions, and against the groundless accusations. As we know, Xinjiang is the largest ethnic autonomous region in China. Since the founding of the People's Republic of China, regional autonomy has been practiced in Xinjiang, where 13 ethnic groups live together. According to the Constitution, all ethnic groups are equal. No discrimination, no suppression is allowed. Well, issues facing Xinjiang are about fighting terrorism, extremism, and separatism, not human rights violations. A few years ago, Xinjiang was severely ravaged by terrorism and violence, causing huge casualties and property losses. To stop the trend while fighting terrorism, China has taken preventive steps to promote de-radicalization, like establishing training centers. Such efforts have produced good results. In fact, we have drawn upon international experience and practice from global partners and the UN in our counter-terrorism and de-radicalization efforts in Xinjiang. The UN Action Plan to prevent violent extremism points out that poverty, unemployment, lack of education, and distortion of religious belief, among others, are causes for violence and extremism. It is imperative to provide education and economic opportunities to those affected, and help them stay away from violent and extremist thinking and groups. Countries like the US, the UK, and France have established de-radicalization centers or correction centers. China's measures are not entirely different from theirs. The Chinese government, by offering training and employment opportunities, help people in Xinjiang get out of poverty. The past 4 years have not seen a single terrorist attack in Xinjiang. People feel much safer. They could sleep tight at night. Restaurants and cinemas are open till midnight. Last year, per capita income in Xinjiang rose by over 3.2% despite the COVID-19 impact. All this is the best protection of human rights. It seems that not everyone wants to see a peaceful Xinjiang. China haters don't. They have made too many lies, like concentration camps, genocide, and forced labor. These political manipulations aim to strip the workers, peasants, and men and women, the aged people and children in Xinjiang of their right to pursue a better life, thereby harming China's security and development interests. We would never allow such efforts to go their way. The EU is against disinformation. Yet these are lies, more outrageous than disinformation. The French author Maxime Weavers published a book, The End of Uyghur Fake News, which shed light on this question. I hope the EU and its member states will stay away from judgments along ideological lines, reject disinformation and lies, and adopt an objective and sensible stance. I wish to emphasize that the sanctions are confrontational. Sanctions based on lies could be interpreted as deliberately undermining China's security and development interests. It is the responsibility of the Chinese government to protect the safety and the well-being of the people in China. We want dialogue, not confrontation. We ask the EU side to think twice. If some insist on confrontation, we will not back down, as we have no options other than fulfilling our responsibilities to the people in our country.
So you're saying sanctions, not sanctions, but rather dialogue. But you know, of course, Ambassador, the question of forced labor is also impacting on the comprehensive agreement on investments. But we'll come to that in a minute. Thank you for that. On Hong Kong as well, Ambassador, the recent statements coming out from the High Representative Josep Borrell accused China of violating international commitments, and namely the Sino-British Joint Declaration. Now, those are also very serious allegations. Your response to that?
Well, the legal basis for the governance of Hong Kong is the Constitution of China and the basic law of Hong Kong SAR. Not the Sino-British Joint Declaration. The declaration is primarily about the UK returning to China the illegally occupied Chinese territory. China elaborates on its basic policies regarding Hong Kong in the annex of the declaration, which have been included in the basic law. Not a single paragraph in the declaration could serve as a legal basis for foreign interference in China's internal affairs. I noted that the EU accuses China of eroding one country, two systems. We must make it clear that one country and two systems are an integral whole and cannot be divided. Some radicals committed vandalism, robbery, and arson, and attempted to paralyze the Legislative Council and pursue Hong Kong independence, gravely endangering national security. And these are acts to subvert the one country, two systems. The national security law and the decision to improve the electoral system aim to uphold the one country, two systems.
Ambassador, there's a concern here also, I mean, really about the option of, patriots, only patriots will be allowed to administer Hong Kong. And that goes against the vein of political pluralism in Hong Kong, doesn't it?
Well, when Mr. Deng Xiaoping put forward one country, two systems, he also put forward patrons administering Hong Kong. He said, patrons are those who uphold the motherland's resumption of exercise of sovereignty over Hong Kong, and who do not undermine Hong Kong's prosperity and stability. We can find the quotation in his book. Well, these criteria, I think, are still valid. In any country, those holding public offices are required to be patrons. Loving the country they serve is a basic code of political ethics. It doesn't mean opposition parties could not be elected. There are also patrons in opposition parties who could stand in election according to law. Well, a week ago, the European Parliament lifted the immunity of 3 MEPs, clearing the way for them to be extradited back home. It shows that the EU recognizes the provisions of the constitution of its member state, that the autonomous region must uphold the national interests. I don't understand why does the EU go for a different yardstick on Hong Kong. Some talk about democratic backsliding in Hong Kong. Well, Hong Kong did not have democratic institutions until its return to the motherland in 1997. Mm-hmm. There was no democracy to speak of under the British colonial rule. Some are trying to mix riots with the democracy and freedoms. It's ridiculous. A former Hong Kong electoral president said that democracy means that the people with different opinions could talk to each other. If you don't like my opinions, you can turn your back on me, but you can't beat me or set me on fire. We stand for peaceful demonstration. But the riots in 2019 obviously run counter to these democratic values and pushed Hong Kong to lawlessness and disorder. And some people compare the EU's comments on Hong Kong and those on the US Capitol Hill attacks. They say one could hardly find a better example of double standards. The objective of universal suffrage, as stipulated in Article 45 and 68 of the Basic Law, does not change. The central government of China has been consistent in supporting the gradual development of Hong Kong's democratic systems suited to Hong Kong's circumstances. Hong Kong's electoral system is part of the China's local electoral system. It is entirely China's internal affair. We hope the EU follows the basic principles of international law, refrains from meddling in China's internal affairs, fully respects one country, two systems, and supports Hong Kong's prosperity and stability. This is also in the EU's interests, I believe.
Ambassador, there are lots of questions coming in already, but I want to pursue our conversation a little bit more and going back to the two sessions. We'll go back to the question of Xinjiang and Hong Kong possibly during the Q&A. So about your role in this Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, explain to us a little bit how you combine that with your position as China's ambassador to the EU, your day job in a sense.
Well, the two sessions were concluded last week and attracted global attention. The two sessions are highlights in China's political calendar, as they not only take stock of the work of the past year, but also show the way for future work. The two sessions are short for the annual sessions of the National People's Congress, NPC, and the National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, CPPCC. The sessions usually take place around the same time, so they are called the two sessions in brief. The NPC, China's highest organ of state power and top legislature, consists of nearly 3,000 deputies, too many, from all walks of life. They have the decision power on important matters related to national development and livelihoods, and something like that. The people exercise state power through the NPC and the People's Congresses at the lower levels, whose deputies are elected by the people. This is an example of how democracy works in China. The CPPCC is an important organ for multi-party cooperation and political consultation, led by the governing party, Chinese Communist Party, CCP. The 2,158 members, I'm one of them, of the CPPCC National Committee, are composed of members of the CPP and CCP, and 8 other parties, and also people with no party affiliation, and representatives of NGOs, ethnic minority groups, and various sectors. The CPPCC conducts a political consultation on state policies and exercises democratic supervision by making proposals and criticisms. In 2020, members of the CPPCC National Committee made over 5,900 proposals covering political, economic, cultural, social, ecological, and other areas. Some proposals are about the 14th five-year plan, poverty eradication, and other major policy issues. And others are about population aging, food safety, and other issues to the concern of the public. CPPCC members have the duty to reach out to various sectors and listen to their voices. As a CPPCC member working overseas, I focus on making proposals on China's development and external relations based on what I observe here in Europe.
Okay, so you're taking the story, the European story to the people there. Okay, yeah, sure. I wonder what you tell them, really.
Yeah, well, this year, as you mentioned, I didn't go back to Beijing to attend the two sessions in person, but I made several proposals, one of which is on how to strengthen China's geographical indications system. The China-EU GI agreement and the EU's well-established GI system have been quite helpful to me. I hope that this proposal could contribute to the implementation of the GI agreement and the growth of China-EU economic ties.
Right. So, Ambassador, thank you. So that's quite interesting. And I just wanted to also come back to some of the decisions that have been taken regarding dual circulation. And there's quite a lot of commentary in here in Europe and in the United States. Some concerns also that China may be turning inwards. There's references to self-reliance and, you know, boosting sort of domestic consumption, turning a little bit concerned about turning inwards. And this seems to be also the case for the 14th five-year plan, Agenda 2035. So just some comments from you on how you see this evolving. Is China sort of retreating from its commitments to multilateralism, the global economy, etc.?
Well, the 14th five-year plan puts forward a new development paradigm, which is called dual circulations. Domestic circulation will be the mainstay, and domestic and international circulations will reinforce each other. This is a response to the changing dynamics in China's economic development and the global environment. Look around the world, we can find that for major powers that have become middle and high income countries, domestic demand as a share of GDP is rising, usually over 80%. This is the case for the US, Japan, Germany, and UK. In China today, consumption contributes to about 60% of economic growth, still lagging far behind developed countries. We need to tap into the potential of domestic circulation and make growth more driven by homegrown investment and consumption. This could bring out the strengths of the huge Chinese market, make China's economy more resilient, and contribute to global recovery. With the dual circulations, China will not decouple from the rest of the world or turn inwards. China has been deeply integrated into the global economy. We could not be better off by shutting doors. This is what we learned from the past decades of reform and opening up. Last year, China and other 14 countries signed the RCEP, leading to the world's largest FTA. China and the EU finished, as you know, the negotiations on the CAI. With a better institutional and legal safeguards, market access to China will be further facilitated. Market rules will be more transparent. The business environment will be more attractive. This means more possibilities for Europe and other partners. For instance, in the coming 5 years, we will raise the percentage of permanent urban residents to 65% of the population, which means over 10 million rural residents moving to cities every year. The 50 million newly added urban residents would mean a big demand for services, which provides opportunities to EU investors strong in services.
Ambassador, I wanted to come back to you also on climate change. So there was quite a lot of, let's say, enthusiasm in Europe when China came out with its climate neutrality pledge. And looking at some of the decisions taken in the 2 sessions and the 14th five-year plan, there is concern about your commitment, or rather your lack of commitment, to phasing out coal, the moratorium on coal-fired plants. And some of that is really linked also the Belt and Road Initiative projects in many, many foreign countries, where China is still using coal-fired plants and building coal-fired plants. So where do you stand on this commitment to the climate pledge, to the Paris Agreement, and the real actions on the ground, if you like?
Well, last September, President Xi Jinping announced that China will aim to peak its CO2 emissions by 2030 and strive to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. Government departments, local governments, and the general public are now taking actions. The coming 5 years is crucial for China's carbon peaking. Of the 8 binding targets set in the 14th five-year plan, 5 are related to green development. For instance, forest coverage will be expanded to 24.1% of China's total land area. Energy consumption per unit of GDP and the CO2 emissions per unit of GDP will be reduced by 13.5% and 18% respectively. This year, we will roll out a detailed action plan for carbon peaking before 2030. The national carbon trading system will be launched by the end of June this year. In addition to power generation, sectors like steel, cement, chemicals, aluminum, and paper making will be covered by the system. And the commitments would be honored with the concrete actions against all odds. China will give priority to building a clean, low carbon, safe, and efficient energy system. Limit the total consumption of fossil fuels. Use renewable energy as alternatives, and foster a new system for power supply dominated by new energy. The share of non-fossil fuel in energy consumption will be increased to around 20% by 2025 and to 25% by 2030. This will be an energy revolution supported by improved policy incentives and restrictions against coal power. The Green Bond Catalog published last year no longer supports coal-related projects. By 2030, China will bring its total installed capacity of wind and solar power to over 1.2 billion kilowatts, exceeding that of coal power in China today, and larger than the total installed power capacity in the US today. The Belt and Road Initiative aims to promote green development. Hydro, wind, and solar power is already a main part of energy cooperation along the routes. A study by American Enterprises Institute shows that from 2014 to 2020, investment in renewable energy as a share of total investment in Belt and Road projects rose by nearly 40%, exceeding investment in fossil fuels, while asking developing countries to do more. Feasible solutions should be offered to those in need. We are happy to engage in three-party cooperation to make efficient, clean, and diversified energy supply available to other developing countries.
Ambassador, I have a lot of questions for you, but I've also made a commitment to take questions from many of the participants who are watching and listening to us. As you can imagine, there are questions about Xinjiang and a question from EU observer Andrew Redman that I will actually read to you. I'm not sure I can find it exactly on the list, but anyway, it is about access to Xinjiang. Why does not China provide free access to ambassadors or journalists who want to go to Xinjiang? Why is access to the region still restricted? Is one question coming from him and from several other participants as well. So screen is yours.
Well, in fact, Xinjiang is open. It was open, it is open, it will be open forever. And Xinjiang receives a great number of the tourists every year. And also, I think that during the past, in the last year, I think, more than 1,000 foreign journalists, diplomats, and some other people visited Xinjiang. And also we have been keeping the close contact with my counterpart in Beijing to organize or welcome the EU member states ambassadors to Beijing to visit Xinjiang. And of course, and almost everything has been arranged, ready. But I'm so sorry that the EU mission in Beijing raised unacceptable required. So this is not acceptable. But anyway, Xinjiang is open for European ambassadors, open for the foreign diplomats, journalists, and the tourists, open to anyone. And sometimes I'm facing the question, why don't you invite allow the the UN human rights representative to visit Xinjiang. Well, I'm confused. We have repeated this many times in our invitation to the UN Human Rights High Commissioner. And the latest invitation was announced by my minister, Mr. Wang Yi, the State Counselor, Foreign Minister of China, on 7th March in his press conference during the 2 sessions. Anyway, China is open. Xinjiang is open.
So, Ambassador, what you're saying is that EU ambassadors are welcome to visit, but there's been one unacceptable request or point that has been raised. Now, obviously, everyone who's heard you will be interested, including me. What is it?
Well, we have Mandula. We have agreed all the requirements, unless one. They insist to have a meeting with one criminal present in convicted by the Chinese law. This is unacceptable. I'm so sorry.
I see. Also questions coming in, Ambassador, about the CAI, which we call the Comprehensive Agreement on Investments. And as you know, there's going to be a lot of, and there is already a lot of opposition within the European Parliament, lots of questions about the use of forced labor, whether China will actually live up to its commitment to ratify the ILO conventions. You're going to have, it's not going to be easy, neither for you nor for the European Commission to get past many of the questions that are being asked in the European Parliament. How are you going to proceed on that? How are you going to convince skeptics and opponents of the merits of this agreement?
Well, last Friday, the Commission published the market access offers of the CAI. I noticed the positive comments by EVP Dombrovskis and some business leaders. In the past months, I have talked to some MEPs who spoke positively of the agreement per se. This shows that the CAI is indeed of a high standard, benefits both sides, and contributes to greater investment. I take the concerns of some MEPs seriously and talk to them frankly. Some MEPs care about the ratification of ILO conventions on forced labor. I said that China has sound institutions for labor rights protection. The labor law in China prohibits any format of forced labor. China will fulfill its commitments in the CAI, including making sustained and continuous efforts toward ratification of the relevant ILO conventions. I also expressed a wish that the EU honors its commitments as well. Some Europeans are saying that the CAI should be linked with issues like Hong Kong and human rights to put pressure on China. Well, CAI is not a package solution to all differences between China and the EU, still less a tool to exert pressure. Economic issues should not be politicized or overblown. Efforts to address economic issues should not be disrupted. From my recent conversations with the Chinese and EU businesses, there is a widely shared desire to see an early delivery of the CAI so that their rights and interests could be better protected and promoted. I hope and do believe that the European Parliament would make a sensible decision in the EU's own interests.
So there's an interesting question that's just come in, Ambassador, from Jan van Herf, and he says, what are the concrete benefits of the CAI for China itself?
China has announced that we will continue our opening up policy, but even the high standard opening up with the CAI, I believe the CAI will help us with the opening the door wider and wider. This is the point we can benefit from the agreement.
Ambassador, also a concern here, and it's been voiced by no other than the EU Council President, Charles Michel, that China is running on vaccine diplomacy. And of course, in the middle of the pandemic, this is a very, very sensitive and important issue for everyone in the world, in Europe and in the world. And the allegation is, and I quote, that China is running a widely publicized vaccine program for, quote unquote, propaganda purposes. Now, this question keeps coming up. Last year, you may remember, there were questions about mass diplomacy, battle of narratives. Your comment on this, is China doing this? And if so, why is it why is it seeking so much publicity over what it's doing in the vaccine front across the world?
Well, the vaccine is a hot topic today. But in the last May, my president, Mr. Xi Jinping, announced that the Chinese vaccine, when available, will be made a global public good. This will be China's contribution to ensuring vaccine accessibility and affordability in developing countries. We are seeing global shortage in vaccine supplies. Developed countries have made advanced purchases of a bulk of doses, while many developing countries could not access even one single dose. Given that China has made vaccine donations to 69 developing countries in urgent need and exported vaccines to 43 countries. We have also decided to provide 10 million doses to COVAX. We are delivering on the commitment to making vaccines a public good. China has indeed provided limited vaccines to others. Those vaccines first go to high-risk groups in developing countries, like health workers. This could help meet the urgent need of these countries by keeping their healthcare system functioning under stress. This is why we are reaching out. Things like this, I believe, should be done. The earlier, the better. No one is truly safe until all are safe. But China is not a magician who can meet global vaccine demand all on its own. To make vaccines fairly accessible, we need global solidarity and cooperation. Developed countries are expected to give more and quicker help. As for China using vaccines for propaganda purposes, I don't know the rationale for this narrative. China is just doing what it is supposed to do. Some may have seen leaders go to the airport to welcome Chinese vaccines or take Chinese vaccines publicly. This is no more than showing a sense of a responsibility or a natural expression of emotions. It is not necessary to read too much into it. Our position and the action is all too clear. Vaccination is a useful tool to stop the virus, not a geopolitical instrument.
Right. Thank you, Ambassador. So there have been some questions, including from Jan Willem Blanket, about the lack of trust that actually exists between China and, let's put it, the West. And related to that, of course, is an issue we haven't brought up yet, is the United States policy towards China, which of course is in the making at the moment. But there has been talk of extreme competition, of competitive coexistence, all kinds of different sort of descriptions are floating out there. But one thing is clear is that the US and the EU will be talking more often to each other, consulting each other on how to deal with China, how to deal with many of the challenges that China has posed to the West, including on market access, human rights, investments, and many other issues. How do you see this consultation going on? And there's also talk about the Indo-Pacific. The Quad countries just recently had a ministerial meeting. All of this seems to be under the adage of containing China, but even if it isn't containing China, there is a fear there about China's growing presence and assertiveness. Your reactions?
Well, there are indeed some people who take China as a challenge or rival. I wish to emphasize that Chinese people need peace, love peace, and try their best to safeguard peace. China's development is a growth of force for world peace, and it brings opportunities rather than challenges toward prosperity. Thanks to decades of reform and the opening up, China has made tremendous progress and has eliminated extreme poverty, something that had never been achieved over thousands of years in China, even in the world. Yet we are well aware that China still lags behind developed countries in many aspects. There is still a lot to be done to deliver a better life to the 1.4 billion people. China does not have the time, energy, or interest to be anyone's rival, nor does China want to be seen as a rival by anyone. COVID-19 is a reminder that mankind has a shared future and no one can thrive alone. In face of global challenges, the only right approach is solidarity and cooperation. The real rivals are the virus, climate change, terrorism, natural disasters, and so on. Bloc politics, ideology-driven rivalry, or building small circles against certain countries would lead nowhere. People of my age experienced the Cold War, and we know what that meant for the world and for the people. We also know what a long way our world has come toward prosperity since the end of the Cold War. As President Xi put it, we need to keep pace with the changing times. One would be better off in the 21st century without the outdated mindset from the age of the Cold War and the zero-sum game. China-EU relationship has a value in its own right and should not be attached to any other major country relations. the growth of China-EU relations does not target any third party. Hopefully, the EU, while developing relations with other countries, does not take China as a target. EU-US relations should not affect, still less evolve at the expense of China-EU relations. The EU advocates strategic autonomy. Leaders of some European countries said that the EU should not build an anti-China front with the US and called for more engagement with China. These are sensible voices. Hopefully, the EU will act in this spirit and continue to approach its relations with the major countries in a broad context.
Ambassador, thank you very much. We have 8 minutes left and quite a few questions. I'll take two that I think are very useful for me to put to you. One is from Politico, from Giorgio Leali, and it's about that under the CAI, some countries such as France have reserved the right to limit Chinese investment in European media companies. And I was wondering, and he is wondering if you could respond to that. Another question coming from Reka Kolzar, and that is about the 17+1 summit. And she's asking for your comment on reports that some countries of the 17+1 format are actually thinking of leaving and withdrawing from it. I was wondering if you wanted to comment on that.
With your permission, I use my mother tongue to answer the questions. My peer will help us.
Please.
这个中欧投资协定谈判嘛，是双方花了7年的时间，经过35轮的认真的谈判达成的。我想这个协定呢是高水准的，也是平衡的。双方对它的内容是高度满意的。
The comprehensive agreement on investment was concluded in principle after 7 years of negotiation and about after 35 rounds of talks. This agreement is of high standard and is balanced. Both sides are highly satisfied with the content of this agreement.
对于这个媒体和这个娱乐业来说呢，我倒是有个建议。我的建议，这个我到了在布鲁塞尔呢，我看了不少欧洲的电影。我认为欧洲的电影呢水平是非常高的，但是欧洲在中国市场的推广做得不够，并不是中国的市场不开放。所以我想举这个例子呢。我们双方呢，都应该借助中欧投资协定谈判这样一个东风，努力的开展彼此的合作，这个谋求共同的发展，而不是去相互的抱怨。
Regarding the media and entertainment sectors, let me give you an example. Over the years, I have watched many European films and movies which are of very high quality, but there is still a lot to be done to further promote these films in the Chinese market, to let more Chinese audience see these movies. It's not because the Chinese market is not open enough. I cite this example to show that we need to make the best of the CAI to promote cooperation and seek shared development instead of complaining to each other.
关于17+1呢，由于去年的疫情的问题呢，这个会议推迟了。在2周前呢，这个通过视频的方式呢，举行了17+1的这个会议。
On 17+1, that was originally scheduled for last year, but that was postponed due to the pandemic. And 2 weeks ago, the summit took place via video link.
与会各国领导人嘛，就未来世界+1的合作，这个重申了信心和这个愿望，同时呢，也达成了一系列的这个合作的这个框架。那么接下来呢，17+1的合作呢，可能要更加的走深走实，这需要这个机制的各国呢，这个加强沟通，加强合作。当然，我们也需要欧盟方面呢给予理解和支持。中方呢也明确的这个谈到17+1的合作会按照这个有关的标准进行。
And during the 17+1 summit held 2 weeks ago, the participants reaffirmed their confidence in the future prospects of this framework and agreed on many points of further cooperation. And this framework needs to be further substantiated in the years ahead, and that calls for stepped up dialogue and cooperation among all members of this mechanism. In this process, we hope to get the understanding and support of the EU side as well. And China has reiterated the point for many times that the 17+1 cooperation projects are up to the relevant standards.
疫情期间呢，这个中国与中东欧国家的合作，在抗疫领域的合作，更说明了17+1合作的重要性。
And our cooperation during the pandemic in joint response to the COVID-19 is another example to show the relevance of the 17+1 mechanism.
去年呢，中欧班列呢，开行了14000多班次，这是创了最高的纪录。更重要的是呢，在疫情这个受到疫情这个袭击之后呢，空运、海运受到了严重的影响。那么正是这条连接中国与欧洲，更多的是中东欧地区，这条铁路呢，发挥了关键的作用。
During the pandemic, the aviation and shipping sectors were severely hit, yet the China-Europe Express train made over 14,000 trips along the route, a record high ever before. So this line connecting China and European countries, notably the Central and Eastern European countries, played an important role to support logistics.
这个我们应该这些合作呢，应该从这个互利的这个角度啊，去努力的追求这样的合作。它也的确是互利的，平时是互利的，在处于危机的时候，它更是互利的。
So such cooperation needs to be approached from the perspective of mutual benefits. And it has been mutual benefits in normal times, and during the crisis times, such nature of mutual benefits is even more prominent.
我想17+1呢，的未来的合作还是非常有前景的。
So I think the 17+1 mechanism has a bright future.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador. It's been a very, very fascinating conversation. Obviously, 1 hour is not enough to cover all the ground that is covered by this very multifaceted EU-China relationship, cooperation and competition. And we've discussed many, many issues. And thank you very much for your very outspoken comments and your very frank answers, and for taking all the different questions that we have put to you. To all of you watching, thank you for your participation. Apologies if I couldn't put your questions directly to the ambassador, but there is so much ground to cover when we talk about EU-China relations. We probably need several days, and I hope we will have more opportunities, Ambassador, to engage with you and others on these very, very important questions. So thank you everyone for watching. Ambassador, thank you once again for joining EPC's 60-minute briefing today. Everyone, stay well, stay safe, stay safe, Ambassador. Bye-bye.
Thank you.